Hello, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate being here. And it's actually nice to go first because there's no precedence. There's nothing for anybody to compare me to at this point in time, so that's a really good starting place. So as she said, my name is Erica Hoholick. I'm the Worldwide Managing Director of Dove for Ogilvy and Mather. So basically, I sit in London, but I run the brand, the Dove brand globally for Ogilvy across all of our offices, networks, and across disciplines. So I'm here today to sort of talk about a little bit of a journey that I've been on, Dove in particular, but it's actually about a bigger conversation about how do you create a global conversation for a brand. And, the thoughts and sort of theories behind this, well, all I'm going to do is sort of illustrate it with some examples of what we have done on Dove and some of the work that we are currently sort of showcasing here right now, and that's active. So I moved to London in January of 2011 to take this job on Dove. I used to work in Los Angeles, and so I sort of reminiscent of this backdrop, or at least that's what it's like in my mind's eye now that I live in London and there's no longer any sun or sea to be seen ever. And I lived in LA and was working at Chiat Day there across multiple brands sort of during my time there. I worked on Sara Lee, P&G, Gatorade, Pepsi, and really had no thought about moving to London. And I got a call asking me if I was interested in coming to run Dove at Ogilvy. And it's interesting because Dove is one of those brands that I have admired as an advertising professional for a really long time. I mean, the work that the brand has done, the obstacles, the trailblazing that the brand has done, I just think is sort of amazing. And it's actually sort of a case study that I would look at and try and apply it to the brands that I was working on before I even worked at Ogilvy. And I think what makes it special is that Dove was a brand that had sort of a purpose and a mission that was so clearly defined and so brave that everybody sort of understood what the brand was really about and what it stood for beyond just the products that it sold. And that was really appealing to me. So when I got the call, I thought, okay, I could pack up this nice life and this nice backdrop of sun and sea and move to London, and I did that in January. And so I arrived in the dead of winter when there's only about 5 hours of sunlight in London, and I thought, what the hell have I done? This is really a very different experience. And then plus, taking on kind of a global endeavor on a brand like Dove, it is just a lot bigger than you sort of think. And I really, as sort of, again, a person sitting in North America as an outsider, really just thought that I was going to come in and help Dove sort of find its creative ambition again. I felt like the brand had done all this amazing work for the Campaign for Real Beauty between 2004 and 2009, but they had stopped actually supporting the mission. They had started really focusing on a bunch of product ads, really functional benefits, and I just thought there seemed to be a missing opportunity to get back to really what was the bigger idea behind the brand. And I thought it was going to be an easy job. I was going to come in, sort of help them define that path forward, and we'd be done. And I showed up, and it was a slightly different scenario because what you find is that these big global brands, to have work that is globally relevant everywhere is actually a much harder job to be done than maybe people give credit to or think about. So the great thing was that Dove, as a brand, had an amazing starting point. They understood that only 4% of women globally considered themselves beautiful, which is sort of a staggering statistic and really depressing on a lot of levels. But what it did is it gave you a starting point for a brand, and that was always what the mission was based on back in 2004 when they launched the Campaign for Real Beauty. But what you realized is that how you make this relevant to women in terms of overcoming that obstacle and getting women to sort of shake up the complacency in women and have them think about themselves in a different way is actually a much harder job to do if you're doing it on global scales, because all of the conversations that are happening are coming from specific cultural reference points. So how do you sort of galvanize that and actually make it a global conversation? So the good news is we had a good starting place. The bad news is we had to sort of find a way to make it something that was resonant everywhere. So this was the campaign that I, as a consumer in North America, looked at. It was called Tick Box, and it was so brave and starting a debate that was sort of about democratizing beauty, that was about creating a debate with women that was about really sort of questioning the fundamental things that everybody had always said women should be judged in media by other brands. And, we're sort of taking Dove was taking a real stand against kind of all those stereotypes. And I thought it was amazing, and it was brave, and it was disruptive and distinctive, and it really appealed to me. But as you start to understand how that worked in North America, Western Europe, when those were the cultural references, so that was what's happening, what you quickly realize is that sometimes that doesn't always translate into other cultures. So if you're from a culture where debate is actually not part of the cultural conversation, how does this work? If you're from a culture where actually beauty is seen as the way you fit into society, I mean, by grooming yourself in a specific way, by putting on makeup, is actually seen as you being a bettering society. Those are really deep-seated values that if a brand comes in and doesn't sort of understand that and have a relevant conversation, it should actually be quite off-putting. And so when you did something that was a direct translation to that conversation, it didn't always work. And so I think the job to be done for us was really to figure out, how do you take advantage of this massive information that we have about these women, this deep insight, this huge opportunity for this brand, and how do we make it relevant and resonant and actually start to change the conversation globally? So there's some basic things that we actually started to think about, so taking sort of the brand aside, it's like, just what are some things that we have to know about how to do this, and some obstacles or some things that we had to clear out of the way in order for us to sort of make it happen. And the first one was that in most emerging societies where the middle class is emerging, now able to afford the products that we are typically selling that are sort of being imported from the West, moving to the East or the South, they don't have a starting place for what your brand is about. And sometimes if you've just translated directly what your brand was from North America, from Western Europe, it actually isn't a resonant starting place. It's not actually a relevant starting place. So they might not have the right idea for what your brand is about or what your brand could be about. And so I think it's a really important conversation, to have, which is like, what is the baggage that you're taking with you? Some brands don't have any, and that's a really good thing, and you get a blank slate and a free pass. But if you are bringing something, or you have brought something that wasn't actually effective, wasn't actually something that they were interested in, wasn't actually something that they understood, then obviously you kind of have a bigger hurdle to overcome. So it's definitely a point. And then I think this is not just kind of creating a global conversation. I think this is something we're all dealing with right now, is that, the days of like a big media plan and a big TV buy, those days are done. And a consumer isn't sitting there waiting to get your message. You actually have to become the thing that people are interested in. You have to actually become the thing that people are seeking out and passing around, and they are finding their own relevance in it. They're finding their own cultural currency by being a part of that conversation with your brand and as a part of the brand. And so I think it's clearly not new information that, social and mobile play a much bigger part. But again, in those emerging markets, that is a huge part of what's happening. TV is not sort of, the thing that is the driving factor. And I think the other piece that we really have to think about is that, again, I'm running a global piece of the business. So we're developing global assets sometimes in one market. There's local assets being developed in a country that's very specific. Then you're doing things that are, viral digital pieces of work. But all of that work is being seen by one consumer, and they sort of don't care that the global team did this and the local team did that and another office did this. They just see and understand one brand. And I think that we have to do a much better job of thinking about the ecosystem of what we're creating and how all those pieces are adding up to one conversation, to create one brand, to create one purpose and mission, and that it is becoming a very connected understanding of what your brand is about. And I think that there's a lot of times where brands feel really disconnected, and each element is not adding up to something bigger. And Lee Clow, who I worked with for a long time at Chiat Day, who I learned a lot from, he used to say, you have a chance with every encounter you have with a brand and a consumer to reinforce something they believe or to take away and distract from something they believe in your brand. And so I think we just have to make sure that everything we're doing is reinforcing the belief and not distracting from it, and it doesn't feel like, well, is that really something that this brand would do, and is it behaving in a way that is resonant with what its purpose or what they define their purpose to be? And then the last thing we thought about was, and again, this is not new information, it's just sort of compressed and put together in one way, but it's that your social sort of strategy and how the things that you're creating, how they will be passed around and how they will be shared, that actually should be almost the starting place. And then what you do with some of the other assets and the role that TV plays and the role that some of the other pieces of like your brand conversation, those should actually come in after the fact, because I think that the change that's happening is that the social assets are the things that are going global. Those are the things that don't have geographies, they don't have borders, they don't have media plans that they're adhering to. Those are the things that you actually have true ability to share globally with people. And if you're doing the right kind of work, if you're have the right kind of insights about the people that you're trying to connect with, and if you have the right understanding and true center of gravity for what your brand is about, you could actually do that in a relevant way that is relevant globally. So, sort of understanding some of those things about what we needed to think about as we created kind of where we were going with Dove. There were just also then some givens about what we needed to change in terms of to not sort of get ourselves in a situation where we were doing something that felt really resonant with North America and Western Europe and maybe some Latin America and not resonant with the rest of the world. So, what does work and what does cross geographies and what does cross boundaries and does cross casting is getting to a real human truth. When people are seeing something that is, truly about an underlying deep-seated emotional truth, it is resonant. It doesn't matter who's telling you it. It doesn't matter who the woman is in the ad. It doesn't matter what nationality she is. It doesn't matter what language it's told in. We actually all feel something, and we actually feel the same thing. And I think that is something that we need to take into consideration more, because I think we're spending a lot of money and a lot of time recreating things in, for each individual market and, recasting just to say that this is relevant in a market. But I don't know that that's where our money and our time and our energy should be spent when you are trying to really create a global conversation on a global brand and really reinforce your mission of what your brand is about on that kind of a scale and level. The making it relevant, that's probably the hardest part, right? So how do you tell a story in a way that will get people to feel the same emotion and that human truth? And I think that when you do it, you sort of do, you do hit a nirvana. And there's a case study that I'm going to share with you about on Dove. And the interesting thing about it was that as it sort of traveled globally, the Twitter feed that you're getting from India is saying the exact same thing as the women from Brazil are talking about, that the women from North America are talking about, the women from China are talking about. And again, that's how you sort of have understood that there is, you've hit sort of a base chord in people, and that's what we think is pretty important. And then it has to be it's very important that it's authentic to a brand. So you can't just go and have this conversation, but have it not be something that your brand could credibly speak about. I was really fortunate in the fact that Dove has a long history of behaving in this way, acting this way, believing in this bigger purpose. So it became, a easy way to sort of reactivate that and get the kind of traction. But I think for a brand who hasn't sort of stepped into those waters before, you just have to be very careful that what you are saying and what you are talking about and sort of that deeper emotional human truth that you're aiming for and the purpose that you're driving for your brand is actually resonant with the brand and not actually something that's sort of disconnected and not believable from that case. So those were sort of the points that we took into consideration. And the work that we have just most recently done was a global piece of work. What I'm most proud of is that it was a collaboration between, very seamless collaboration between our clients, between our office in Sao Paulo. So work that is truly global is actually coming out of Sao Paulo, not just coming out of London. You know, we had sort of a team in London who was leading some of it, but I think it is sort of the new world order where if we all have a true human understanding of a true understanding of what our brands are about, and we are starting to really get into what are those underlying human truths, that's the kind of work that we could be getting from, you know, Sao Paulo, from China, from India, and that's the hope of sort of what's next. So I'll play the case study, and then if there's any questions, you could talk about it at the end.
Only 4% of women believe they're beautiful. To inspire the other 96% to feel the same, we conducted a social experiment. We called in an FBI-trained sketch artist. First, he sketched portraits of the women based on their own self-descriptions.
The older I've gotten, the more freckles I've gotten.
I would say I have a pretty big forehead.
Once I get a sketch, I say thank you very much, and then they leave. I don't see them.
Then, he sketched the same women, based on descriptions by strangers who had met the women briefly.
She had nice eyes. They lit up when she spoke.
Cute nose.
She had blue eyes, very nice blue eyes.
Finally, we revealed the two sketches to the women themselves.
This is the sketch that you helped me create, and that's a sketch that somebody described of you.
Yeah, that's... The second one looks more open, friendly, and happy.
Our experiment generated 2 films, 8 individual short films, and an online exhibit of the sketches. The sketches' visual became the icon of the campaign, used on print and out of home as thumbnails to encourage social media sharing and to illustrate articles on mass media publications. This gave cohesion to all the media touchpoints around the lead film that ran on TV and cinema.
Very pretty girl, and this actually is what Beth looked like.
Yeah, it's true.
And then you see how Beth described herself. And
what I
she
was
basically
describing...
The sharing and buzz on social media quickly made the headlines of mass media publications all over the world. With just the first 2 weeks, the campaign was the 4th most shared ad of all time and was viewed more than 73 million times on YouTube. It became the most shared article in Mashable's history, and it generated 3.8 billion global impressions. Most importantly, it made real beauty a global topic of conversation again.
That was amazing. A couple of minutes for any questions, if anybody has any questions for Erica here.
I was just really interested in the measurement. It's incredible. But the 4% stat is what made it such a powerful campaign. Do you think you're ever going to measure and see whether you've impacted on that?
We actually are that's sort of in the works. And you know what's great is that the brand actually does sort of look from periodically to sort of see where it's going and if there's any movement. And you see sometimes in some countries there is some movement in the positive direction, but with 4% we have a massive job to do still. But yeah, I agree. That's what we have to be benchmarking ourselves against, or else really what's the point?
Yeah.